She imagined Bessie's brain as a massive library of adages that were filed under various headings, at least one for every occasion. Of course, as the unofficial historian for the town of Darling, Bessie had many other things filed away in her mind, such as important events in the past, historically important sites, and family trees. Verna sniffed. "It would be nice if we would all show up," she remarked, with an edge to her voice. Lizzie knew what Verna was thinking. The Dahlias had hosted a work party 2 weeks before, and 13 out of the 14 club members had attended. Mrs. George E. Pickett Johnson was the missing person. She had offered to send her colored maid, Flossie, but Lizzie had declined. She knew Flossie and liked her, but she thought that Mrs. Johnson should come herself, not send her paid help. Some of the Dahlias had picked and shelled peas, some had harvested lettuce and the last of the spring spinach, and some had pulled carrots, beets, and green onions. There was plenty for the Dahlias to share, as well as a big batch of fresh produce for the Saturday morning farmers' market, where they had a table. What they didn't sell, they gave away when the market closed. Lizzie had noticed that some of the poorer folks hung around until closing time and were glad to get whatever they could. "We'll need to organize another garden party, I guess," Lizzie said. Organizing came easily to her, the reason, she supposed, that she'd just been elected for another term as club president. "This time, maybe Mrs. Johnson will come." "Don't forget that we also have to organize a planting party at the cemetery next week," Bessie cautioned. "Miss Rogers will never forgive us if we don't get those Confederate roses into the ground before the Confederate Day ceremony." "Hibiscus mutabilis," Verna and Ophelia said in unison, and they all laughed. Miss Rogers, the town librarian and a long-time Dahlia, always insisted on using the Latin names for plants. 2 years before, she had taken cuttings from everyone's garden and propagated 14 Confederate roses, not really roses, but hibiscus. The young shrubs were now large and sturdy enough to be planted along the front fence at the Darling Cemetery. And since Confederate Day, an important Darling holiday, as it is across the South, was coming up shortly, it was time to get the plants settled in their new home. Summer would be along soon, not a good time for transplanting. Verna looked up at the sky and held out her hand, palm up. "Was that a raindrop?" Lizzie grabbed the rake from Ophelia. "Come on, girls, let's put the tools away and cool off with some iced tea. Maybe the storm will blow over before we're ready to head for home." A few minutes later, the 4 Dahlias were sitting around the green-painted table in the clubhouse kitchen, a pitcher of mint-flavored tea and a plate of Dr. George Washington Carver's peanut cookies in front of them. The cookies had been baked by Roseanne, the cook at Magnolia Manor, Bessie Bloodworth's boarding house for genteel older ladies, next door to the Dahlias' clubhouse. "That was good work this afternoon, ladies," Lizzie said, pouring the tea. She looked around the table, thinking how much she cherished these 3 friends. She enjoyed all the Dahlias. Like different varieties of roses, each one had her own particular beauty, while some had a few thorns. But the 3 sitting around the table with her this afternoon were very special. "That was hard work," Bessie said, pulling an embroidered hanky out of her sleeve and wiping her sweaty face with it. "But as the saying goes, we can't plow a field by turning it over in our minds." Gray-haired Bessie was 20 years older than the others, but she could work as long and as hard as any of the younger women in the club. She always said she'd grown up with a hoe in her hand and okra and sunflower seeds in her pocket. Everybody valued her gardening experience, especially now that the Dahlias had decided to start raising vegetables in a big way. Lizzie had been on the lookout for projects that would keep the club growing and working together, and the vegetable garden, a natural really, had been her idea. The front yard of the clubhouse they had inherited from Dahlia Blackstone had once been filled with azaleas, roses, and hydrangeas, and behind the house had been almost an acre of beautiful flowers, sweeping down toward a clump of woods and a clear spring surrounded by bog iris, ferns, and pitcher plants. Mrs. Blackstone's garden had been so beautiful that it had been featured in newspapers as far away as New Orleans and Miami, and visitors from all over the state had come to Darling to see it. But by the time the Dahlias took it over, the flowers and shrubs were disconsolate and abandoned, and the garden looked as if it had completely given up hope.